What's going on, YouTubers, gamers and fellow hobbyists, and welcome to this Saruman the White tutorial. Now, I recently saw a Saruman the White tutorial from Games Workshop, which they did their plastic Saruman on the horse. This is a metal Saruman, which I've primed with a Vallejo Surface Primer Grey, as you can see here, and I hand brushed this on. And I'm using a regiment brush to put the first base coat down, which, although I don't show you, it is Ushabti bone. So apologies for neglecting to show you that, but Ushabti bone is the first colour, and we'll be coming back to that anyway at some point. So as you can see, going on this nice bone colour for his robes. This is what we're doing. I am kind of trying to emulate the GW tutorial, but at the same time put my own spin on things as well, because I don't have exactly the same materials and paints as they do. But for the most part I do. I believe they primed the model in rezian. It was, like I say, it was plastic. But anyway, so there we are with the first layer down and done. And he looks pretty good already, I think. I mean, it's a marvellous model. It really is fantastic. It's captured the Christopher Lee Saruman just perfectly. Wild Wood was what they used as a shade wash, heavily thinned down with some of the contrast medium. Now I did this in about a ratio of roughly 6:1. You really do want to thin it down really big style, because it's a very dark colour, and as you can see, it goes on sort of like a shade wash, goes into the recesses. It doesn't pool quite as much, which is good, but you've still got to watch out for that. I'm using an old wash brush to put it on, but it does darken it down a little bit, so we'll be coming in to lighten it back up again afterwards. Like I say, you just got to watch the pooling on this, but it really does add a lot of nice shade and shadow to the cloak folds, which is perfect, exactly what I wanted. And there he is. And what I'm doing there is I'm just dabbing away. I'm just going around the model, dabbing up, mopping up the excess pooling that I didn't want to gather in certain areas, or just move it around slightly. And every so often I would move the brush off camera and dab it onto some paper towel just to mop up what I'd soaked up. Right, back to the Ushabti bone. Now this is obviously the first colour I put down, but we're going to lighten it back up again now. And what we're doing is I'm using a regiment brush again, and what I'm doing is I'm painting it on, but I'm avoiding the deepest recesses, so that this will just brighten it back to its original Ushabti bone, but obviously have the shadowing that I wanted to begin with. Because yes, he's an off-white. He's called Saruman the White, but he's very off-white in the latter half of the story anyway. I'm going from Hobbit to Lord of the Rings, but I mean, it's very old. His cloak is very old, but he still needs to be quite bright. He needs to be recognisable as Saruman the White, so this is the way to go. Just neaten it back up whilst avoiding the recesses, and then you've got what you want. Okay, a Black Templar. Now this was used for his staff mainly. Yeah, so be very, very careful when you use this. This is straight out the pot, and because you don't want to get it over the folds of the cloak. You don't want to have to go back in and neaten up and then do shading again. So be very, very mindful of that when you do it. In hindsight, I probably would have gone with the black first. Screaming Skull is next, and what we're going to do with this is we're going over the folds of the robes again, but this time just the higher edges. We're just picking out the high ridges, as you can see there. Obviously still avoiding the recesses. and work all around the model doing that. Just the high folds of the cloth in his robes, and you'll be good to go. Once you've done this stage, you can really see a difference in how he looks. Really does. You just follow the folds you can see, and it really does make a huge difference. Obviously, do the edges as well. Just be very careful as you go around. Right, pallid witch flesh, and we're doing pretty much the same deal here. But this time we're just going. We're using a smaller brush, a character brush by Army Painter, and you're going along the folds again, but just the higher, he says, the sharper edges this time, keeping it a bit thinner and narrower, and not going all the way down. Just the higher edges, and this will really bring out the detail, and will fool the eye into thinking, yes, he's wearing white robes, when in fact he actually isn't. You know, the kind of dirty white without being off-white, if you know what I mean. It just gives that illusion. So just follow each edge, all the sharpest edges. Use the edge of your brush if you have to. And once I've done that, I go to the skin, and for this we are using Cadian Flesh Tone, down to a detail brush this time, and we're painting that on just his face and his hands. There's not a lot of flesh in here. You don't have to be overly careful, but it's a good practice for being careful for later on, if you know what I mean. So yeah, we're going on his face and his hands. It's just the two hands holding his staff. Be very careful not to go over the Black Templar. And once you've done that, it really starts coming to life. Dark Reaper is next, and we're going to use this for a bit of a highlight on the staff. Now, along the bottom of the staff, there's a little ridge which sticks out a little bit, and you can use it there. This is where I started with the highlight, so it's along the bottom. So it's that bottom ridge, and the spiky bits on top of his staff that hold that orb. So just go along the edges. There's about 4 prongs that you need to do, and just underneath that there are other like sharp edges as well. Just go along the edges of those with the Dark Reaper. Okay, and that's how he looks kind of at the halfway stage. So I did stop here and take a couple of pictures. On the next stage I do go in and I paint up the base, just black it in just to make it look better. And there he is from the rear. This is, like I say, halfway stage, so the hair hasn't even been done yet, but I'm really kind of pleased with how that's turned out. So yeah, let's crack on then. And we're going in with Reichland Flesh Shade for his skin, starting on his face and his hands. Just be careful not to get it on his robes when you come to his hands. Don't want that contaminating the colour that you have for his robes already. So just don't put too much on, just a little bit. Right, Fen Rezian Grey. So we're going back to his staff now, and I had to do it in this order because of drying time. So further edge highlighting now on the prongs, so just on the very sharpest edges as you go around on the top ones and on the ones underneath. And we also use Fen Rezian Grey to colour the orb that's in the middle of his staff, like so. So just be careful not to go over the Black Templar when you're doing that. It's just a pain to neaten up with that colour. I suppose it could have done Abaddon Black, but Black Templar worked rather well, I thought. Just making sure to get all the highlights you want with that, because it's very subtle at this stage. Going back to the skin, and we're going back to Cadian flesh tone to lighten it up a bit more. We're going over the skin again, but this time we're leaving the recesses, so don't go too far to the edges, and obviously leave the eye sockets dark as they are. You don't need to go in there with that. You know, you're far better off leaving it dark and sullen looking and brooding. And the cheeks, the cheekbones, and a little bit either side. Then we're going to Ulthorn Grey whilst we're waiting for that to dry. So a little highlights on the orb, just little lines to make it look like there's something swirling around in that orb. It's a very tricky effect to master. I don't think I quite pulled it off, but that's what the aim is. But it makes it look like there's something in there, right? You know, it's some weird magical orb of some mystical origin, and that's what we wanted. Be very mindful of this because it's such a small area that you notice the areas are getting smaller now gradually. I believe I went over the Black Templar at that point. So just trying to rub it away. Right, let's get a good position. Get a bit on the top of the orb as well, like so. Right, Kislev flesh. Right, the first real highlight of the flesh, proper highlight, and we're going to start with the nose. It's like that kind of gets you into the zone of the face. You know, if you're like terrified of doing faces or whatever, I'll try starting with the nose. It'll get you into it. You know, like I say, it'll get you into the zone, or the facial zone, and the cheeks. Either side, be careful not to go over the beard and hair. And just do a few lines across the top of the forehead. You know, if you can. It kind of gives an impression of a slight furrow to the brow. If you can pull that off, it's brilliant. You don't need it, but you can have a go. It certainly doesn't make it look weird, which was my biggest fear. On the hands, just go over the fingers and the knuckles and some of the raised edges on his hands. Right, flayed one flesh is next, because that last highlight didn't take long to dry at all. And starting with the nose again, this time on the very edge of the nose, the very tip of the nose, more or less. And not quite so far in on the cheeks, but the edges, the cheekbone edges. And if you can, and you see it, do his bottom lip as well. Do more lines going across his forehead as well. And on his knuckles, just do the very ends. And don't bother doing anything else, just to pick out those very ends of his knuckles there, and that'll draw the eye. Back to a Black Templar, and now for his bushy eyebrows, which are black with certain highlights. So we're just using that. Black those up. Be careful not to go in the eyes. Mechanicus Standard Grey. We're just slightly rubbing over the ends of the black eyebrows with Mechanicus Standard Grey, just to pick out some of the more wiry hairs. Believe me, it looks better in person than it does on camera. Okay. Administratum Grey is next. Now we're doing like part of his belt on his robe, which you can see is just a small part, and we're going to go and do his hair as well. You're going to layer his hair with a base coat of Administratum grey. So just take your time with it. Try not to rush. You get to the stage of painting where it's like, oh, I want to get it done now, I want to get it done, but don't rush it. Just take your time and all will be well. Until you get all the areas of the hair you need. There's quite a bit of detail on his hair. I was quite impressed for a metal miniature how much detail he actually had. Right, pallid witch flesh, which we're going to use as a highlight just on the very ends of the hair and the sharper edges, and then we're pretty much done. Don't forget his beard and moustache as well. Just pick out the very highest edges, and you can kind of do a bit of random pattern here. We're coming in with Null Oil to give some separation on the side from his hair and his beard. So that's all we're doing with that one, just in the side there. That's really it. I didn't even water that down. Well, just the dampness of the brush it was. White scar. And this will give us the final highlights, I believe, across the hair and moustache and beard. And then we are good to go, my friends. This is Saruman the White. I'm very pleased with how he turned out. He was an absolute joy to paint. Really wonderful to paint this. And you know, it's because I watched The Hobbit recently that I've decided to get back into the Lord of the Rings painting. You know, with these characters here, he really is a wonderful model. He's going to be fab in my D&D games. Who knows, might even get to Middle Earth. But there he is. That's Saruman the White. Obviously the only thing I did after this was to go in with a matte varnish with which to coat him in, because he will be being used in games for something or another. And the black base there, I'm not sure what to do with that yet, or whether to just leave it black. But there he is, Saruman the White. That's not a very good picture, but there he is nonetheless. So thanks for watching, my friends. Remember, all brushes lead to war. Check me out on Patreon if you can. If not, just like, share, subscribe, and I'll see you guys on the next video. Bye for now.